All right, here's where the fun really begins on our Photoshop composite image project. Hopefully you've taken the time to follow along and you've got an image in place here with a background and maybe a cutout of yourself or the assets that I've provided. And you got your colors looking kind of close here. We've got maybe some shadows in place. Just to reiterate here, my shadow was just to show you how to do this effect, but realistically, you know, it's coming from the side as far as lighting, so that wouldn't be a great solution here. But anyway, take the time to get it right where you want, and now we're going to push it further. This is where the fun really begins, because you can do as much as you want. As much time as you have, you can go for it. Here's another example of a project that I made for a client. This was an actual poster we had printed. That was their battle wagon, they called it. That's a real thing. And the before photo, here, I'll move this to the side. Here's what I started with. So we actually already had some bullet shells on the ground, but the background wasn't that compelling. The sky was kind of boring, the colors were a little muted, and this landscape isn't that impressive. So what we ended up doing was bringing in some new mountain ranges, did some coloring, then I brought in some custom flames that I bought at creativemarket.com, so they were already isolated for me. I've got a little more visual interest in the sky going on here. Then I brought back in the battle wagon here, and you can see where selections really play a huge part in selling this. I actually had to cut through the glass, but you'll see now we've got this blue overshadow here, or this blue coloring, and I had to cut out right here where the bumper is. That was see-through, so the flames show through. So there's a lot of attention to detail, and even the reflection on the roof to make it look kind of real. And then I came back and created fake windows over the top, did some more coloring, added a flare layer here to kind of blend between the sky, and even added a huge moon just because I could. So it was a lot of fun to make this project. So you can see, you know, don't just stop here with a background and an image of yourself. Go ahead and add more elements. And in fact, if you wanted to, I will provide this isolated fire folder for you. So if you wanted to, you can just start bringing in maybe some fire or anything else you can imagine. And again, this has already been isolated for me, so it does a pretty good job of blending into the background. But there's some ways that we can make this look even more realistic. So one of the ways is dragging this layer behind him, maybe duplicating it or bringing in another fire object. I'll just drag and drop right over the top here. I'll scale it down, and we'll bring this layer in front of him. I'm going to hit Command and the right bracket key just to move that up one step. So now it looks like he's actually standing in the fire. We can play with this even further. If I zoom in, now I'm going to come back to this flame layer and double click. And just to clarify here, I don't want to double click on the icon. This is a smart object. If I double click there, it'll take me to the flame open in a different file, in a different tab. So what we want to do is double click right here, and not in the name either, because that'll make us rename the layer. I want to click over here on the side, and that opens up my layer styles. So this is where we can add a lot of different things, especially if it was a text layer or something else. But right now, what I'm really interested in is this blend if mode. So right now I'm working on this flame in front of his foot, and I can say anything that's bright on this top layer, this layer meaning the one I'm working on, I can make it go away. I can hold down the Alt key and split this to kind of make it a smoother transition, but that doesn't look quite like what I want it to do, so I could try the dark layers, and there's really not much dark in this flame. It's all bright. That again doesn't do what I want it to. So let's try the underlying layer. I'll start dragging this back. So now anything with a light tone will start to show through. So some of those flames and the flame behind now start to peek through a little bit, and that way it looks like they're blending together. And I'll hold down the Alt key and I'll drag right from the dark layers, and now his shoe kind of starts to come back, and it's just a subtle effect, just enough to know that it's still there, but the flames are in front of it. So this is a really great trick to start blending layers together. So I'll hit OK and come back. So you could really push this a lot further. Another thing that we can do to sell this, again, our light source is from the left. So we could use the dodge and burn tools. I'm going to click once on this layer, and I'm going to rename it. So I'll just double click in here, and I'll call this original for now. Really, it's not the original. We've already done some coloring to it, but it's as close to the original as I have. I'm going to hit Command J to duplicate it. I'm going to come over here and grab my dodge and burn tools. So the dodge tool and the burn tool, basically what they do, let's look at that. Let's look at the dodge tool first. Right now I'm working on the mid-tones range. My exposure is at 50%, and now as I paint over this layer, it actually exposes it and makes it brighter. So I could come along this left edge here, or any highlights that I want to really make pop, whether it's on his face, and I can paint with mid-tone exposure at 50% and basically brightening it up. So we're essentially painting with light, and that's one of the biggest fundamental keys when you're doing Photoshop composite images and you see some of those really extreme HDR merge types of things. A lot of times it's just painting with light or dark, and I can turn this off and see where I've painted. Another way to work is I could turn that layer off. Let's duplicate this original layer again, and I could grab my layers, or I'm sorry, my levels, Command L, and I could just come in here and really crank up the details this way. And I'll use a layer mask. I'll click on this layer mask. If I click right now, nothing happens. It just adds a mask to be filled. If I Alt click, it actually fills that with black by default, so you can't see it. Everything's been hidden. So now I can hit the B to get my brush tool. And because black hides and white reveals, I can swap this right here. I'll hit the letter X to swap my foreground and background colors, or I can hit this tiny little double arrow to swap which one's in front, but I basically want to be painting with white. So as I come through here and I start painting, I'm actually unmasking or revealing the layer below it. Now up here I've got my opacity set to 12%, so you're really not seeing any change. I'm just going to scrub that back up to 100% so we can see. I'm going to make sure I'm painting on my mask layer here. And then one other thing is I got to make sure my blend mode is set to normal up here so we see what's going on. There we go. Now that's a pretty harsh brush. I could come back in, drop this opacity down quite a bit, and just make some subtle changes here. And the benefit of working this way is if I change my mind or if I get too much, I can just hit the letter X to swap, and now I'm painting with black, and I can come back in and reverse my mask. So this way is a lot less destructive. It's a nice way to add some highlights or some dark tones. So let's go ahead and do some dark tones now. If I grab my original layer and I'll hit Command J, there's a couple ways I could work here. Let's finish that other dodge burn section. I'll come back over to my dodge burn tool, and now I'm going to use my burn tool, and I can burn my highlights, my midtones, or my shadows, whatever you want to do. I'll select my midtones, and now as I start painting over this, it just burns the layer. So it just adds more depth, and I probably want to burn the right side a little bit to make it darker. And right now I'm mostly showing you technique. This doesn't look that fantastic, but you can play with this depending on what your image needs, and if maybe you need to work on the shadows or the highlights, you can just change the range, and now it'll only affect the highlight tones but not really the darker tones. So it's a really nice way to really refine what you're doing here. But again, I like to work non-destructively, so what I'm going to do is duplicate that original layer one more time, Command J, and I'm going to change my blend mode to multiply, and now it's multiplying that layer and making everything dark behind it. That's one way to get it looking dark. The other way, I can come back to my layer, my levels, Command L, and I could scrub here to bring in some darks, but maybe pull back a little bit on the mid-tone, so I'm just really dealing with the dark tones. Like I said, there's a lot of ways to do the same thing. So now I'm going to add a layer mask to this. I'm going to hold Alt and click on my mask. So now that dark tone has gone away. Make sure I'm painting on that mask layer with my brush tool. And I'm going to hit X to swap my foreground, so it's painting with white to reveal. So I can come in here and start adding some of those dark tones if I wanted to, really sell the fact that there's a shadow on this side. And you can see right away I do have some color issues here. So it's one of those things where depending on your image and what's in the image and what effect you're trying to get, you might need to use multiple techniques. The dodge and burn, you might need to use the blend modes over here to get different effects, and masking. So these are all great ways to work, but to really try and sell that effect. And again, you're going to need to experiment with what makes sense in your image. So I don't like the shadows I did there. I'm just going to turn it off, and I don't mind those bright colors. The flame thing is a little, obviously a little ridiculous, but just wanted to show you that you can work elements back and forth and bring in some different things. Now, if this truly was on fire here, his leg would be glowing on this side. So what I'm going to do is Command click on this layer to get a selection. I'm going to click on the new layer icon right here to get a layer in front of it. And I'm going to, let's see, there's a few ways we could do this. I could sample, I'm going to use the letter I to get a sample of this color, this yellow color. Hit B to get my brush tool, and maybe drag my opacity down quite a bit and just kind of start to add some yellow highlights there. Maybe get the letter I again to sample a different color within that and just kind of work in some different colors here. And then I can play with my blend mode there. I'll come over here to my blend modes, and this just changes how the layers interact with each other, how they blend. Whatever's on top blending with what's below. So a shortcut I like to use, with your move tool selected, the letter V, on the layer you want to change. Now if I just hit shift and the plus sign, or shift and minus, I can step back and forth between these here and get a quick idea of what's going to look good. So hold down shift and plus, and I just cycle real quickly and see what color mode might interact to get the most realistic effect there. Oops. So, and once I get something I'm happy with, and this is total preference, just whatever you want to do, I can leave it there. I can even push this a little bit further. Maybe I grab this flame, hold down the Alt key to drag a copy over here, Command T to just change it a little bit here, and maybe even reflect it. I'll right click and I'll flip horizontal. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is come back down to this layer, and you can see I'm starting to get a lot of layers. So what I'll do is I'll tear this off so I can see more. All right, so this flame and this layer is what I'm working with here. So I'm going to drag this down, and there's a few things I could do. I could hold on the Alt key and click between here, and what that does is it uses whatever layers below as a mask. If I want to undo it, I'll hold on Alt and click between the layers. So that's an easy way to, now I can move this layer around and you'll see it's masked by the shape below it. Another way I could work is, well, that's actually probably my favorite way to work right now. But now I can add a layer mask to this here, and I can start to paint with black to hide some of this, and I need to drag my opacity back up here. And I can start to remove some of this here. And I just want this to be a subtle effect. So I'm going to scrub my opacity for that layer down quite a bit, actually. I just want it to be barely even, just barely a hint that it's even there at all. And those are the little details that as you build up more and more will start to really sell the effect that this is really happening. So play with that, whether it's flames or putting it in a different environment. Get that where you want it to go. Use your dodge and burn tools. And now what we want to do is try and bring all of this into one cohesive image. So ways to do that. Now we want to affect this entire image. We did some of that with the color correcting, but now we're going to look at adjustment layers. So let's go ahead and come down here to this little icon. We'll click once on it. And let's start with the photo filter adjustment layer. I'll click once on that, and it adds it right above whatever layer I had selected. And you'll notice, so it affects the background image, but it doesn't do anything to my flames or to the guy standing here. So what I'm going to do is drag this adjustment layer all the way to the top, and now it'll affect everything down below it. And if I toggle this on and off real quick, it's a pretty subtle difference, but it does affect the coloring of the image, and it starts to make it feel more cohesive. If I double click on that, I can see I have some different mask options. If I double click on the camera, it brings me over to the properties of that adjustment layer. So I can change to different filters, some different presets, and you'll see they all have different effects on the image. So what I like to do is probably leave this on this yellow or maybe the warming filter just to get a subtle effect here. Let's add another adjustment layer. This time I'm going to do the hue saturation. And there's some different presets, some different things you can play with. You can work on the saturation to really pull out some of the colors. If you pull it too far, it turns it into a black and white image. Too far the other direction and it really starts to look terrible. So play with that a little bit, maybe bump it down just a touch. You can work with the overall lightness of the image. But you'll notice it's affecting everything, every layer. And what this will help do for your image is make it feel like the photo is taken at the same place at the same time. Or we can jump over here to the preset. I like the old style, and that helps really make it feel like it's part of the same image. Now, this is a little bit too far. It's probably because I've got this photo filter here. If I turn that off, you'll notice it brings back a little bit of that, and you just need to play with it. Maybe grab this layer and drop the opacity just a touch so it's affecting the layer, but not completely, not at 100% strength. And that'll help just all these little details as you build them up really sell the image. So now that you've done that, go ahead and push this as far as you want and make sure you save along the way as you go. And the other thing we can do here, let me jump real quick into that nerd poster I made, is you can add layers to the very top of this. So right now I've got this effect. It's very, very subtle, but it's a little burst image. Let me show you. I've got it locked. So I'll unlock this layer, turn my opacity all the way up and my fill all the way up. And you see I've got a blend mode again set to overlay. So it overlays the color on top of the layers below it. But change it back to normal. You see it's basically a gradient, like a radial solar flare. And the whole reason that this is on this image, let me change it back to overlay, drop down my fill and my opacity. And you can see it's super, super subtle effect. But what it helps do is color all of it. If I turn it back off, you can see not all the coloring on these people look quite right with the background. So by putting this over the top of it, it really helps darken this top right area, but brighten this like there was one unified light source. So that's basically what we're doing with this layer, is creating a light source now that helps the whole image look unified. These adjustment layers over here, these help the coloring look consistent. And now we want to bring the light source from one spot. So there's a lot of ways to do this. I just happen to use this solar flare thing. So I'm going to drag and drop this over the top of everything in this new image here. Command T to scale it up and resize it where it needs to be. And as I scale it, you can kind of see those lens flares coming, but it almost works out perfect for where the light source in this factory is coming from. So I'm going to scale it to get it pretty close. I'll hit return. And now it made my overall image pretty dark. So there's a few things I can do. I can just drag the opacity down, or I'm going to come back over here with my move tool selected, hold on shift and plus to cycle through some different effects here. Some of these are more believable than others. Some of these are totally unusable. This pin light might be nice if you're really wanting to keep that solar flare effect. But again, every image is different. So just cycle through and see what effect gives you the best results on your image. And right now it's looking like, the other thing I got to look at too is what it's doing to his face, right? So it's looking like lighten might be a good solution. That one's not bad. Color dodge. What's this one? Linear dodge. So just play with it, see what works best. And then again, back off your settings just a little bit so it's not such an overkill effect. And it's all these subtleties that add up to create a really compelling composite image. So good luck with that. Go ahead and press on, get your image just how you like it. Be sure you save along the way. And in the next lesson, we'll take a quick look at exporting what we've completed.